Today, what I want to talk about is more of the actual concept around disruption and innovation. So I'm sure that it's one of the hottest topic right now, right? I'm sure every one of you and your company are trying to find out, okay, what is this disruptor doing? How can I innovate at the same pace, or how can I be more innovators than the others? And at the end of the day, when you think about innovation, what really changed over the past of the 5 years is that the same concept of innovation is actually becoming core to the strategy of the companies. It's not anymore a nice to have. And to highlight that point, what I will do is that I will talk about the Amazon way of doing it, the Amazon recipe. What's the secret sauce that Amazon is using to actually innovate and disrupt so quickly? So just a word of caution here. So I actually work for Amazon Web Services, right? That's not the same thing that Amazon.com, the retailer. Amazon Web Services is the public cloud. Amazon.com, the retailer, that's where we spend our money. Right? That's two different things. So just a state of the nation here, state of the retail nation, before I start with this concept of innovation. What's really staggering when I talk to my customers is actually, the fact that this race towards innovation, the pace is actually increasing. So it's not only a technological fact. I mean, if you think about, just 5 years ago, the predictions were saying that $1 in $20 will be spent online by 2020. The reality is that next year, $1 in 10 will be spent online. Right? Another concept here that I like to talk about is the fact that it's irreversible. The irreversibility of this trend. For the first time last year, when you think about Black Friday, when you think about the 11th of December in China, for the first time last year, we experienced a decrease in sales 2 weeks before these events. So effectively, a digitally driven event has made me change the way that I actually shop. And the other concept is the survival aspect here. So I'm not going to talk about, the fact that disruptors are disrupting the place, obviously. Another thing that, we take lightly here is the fact that, again, for the third consecutive year in the US, and now it's happening here in EMEA, in Europe, the number of physical shops are decreasing. Think about it. That's an economic, I would say, ethos that we had for more than a century. If you build, they will come. That does not work anymore. And when I talk about the shift from physical to digital, the reality is now is changing. It's not so much of a shift anymore. It's more of a convergence. Right? What you see is that the digital world is being embedded now into the physical world. And this is the resultant of all the omni-channel customer-centric strategies. Effectively, it's the shop that is reinventing himself. From a technological standpoint, of course, there is disruption when it comes to technology. If you think about, just mobile, the mobile aspect of it. If you think about the line of business applications, by 2017, every single line of business application will be mobile. Effectively, what it means this is a translation of the API, the sharing economy. Of course, everything is going mobile, but what's the problem with that? The problem with that is that a mobile application, as an average, will make 6-7 API calls. Half of these API calls are APIs that you do not own. Huge problem for integrating that data. That data is actually growing. If you think about the data that we generate over the course of the last 2 years, right, it's 90% of the data has been generated over the past 2 years. Next year, they're already saying that we'll be generating more data than last year. The problem with data is that it creates gravity. So when you think again, the Amazon, the GAFA, the tunas, all the disruptors, the thing that they have in mind, and that's what makes them extremely different from the others, is that when they look at data, they think that data is capital. They treat data as an economic asset of production. They don't throw it away. They actually keep it, and they mine it. And they call that mining the mine. The more you mine data, the more data you generate, that actually refines your algorithms. And that's how they operate. Right? If you think of all the disruptors of the world, that's exactly what they are doing. They are treating data as capital. The third thing I wanted to talk about, as you need to mine the data, you need compute power. You need somehow, computers that are actually crunching that data. So you see a great move of the compute analytic power of this world towards the cloud. And because you need to be more clever, more prescriptive, more predictive, right? Behind recommendations, behind the scenes that you have, it's tons and tons and tons of algorithms and machine learning mechanisms. All these mechanisms and all this crunching is going into the cloud. 80% of the workloads will be data intensive. It's not anymore the case of saying, what I put in the cloud is my website. Why? Because I need elasticity. Right now, the core of your business is actually going into the cloud. And I'm not even touching on IoT. But IoT, especially in the world of retail, will be certainly the biggest disruptor. So it's not the fact that we have sensors, right, that are able to tell you a lot of things about movement, tracking, and all that kind of stuff. The main thing about IoT is basically that it makes the concept of Internet of Now a reality. The Internet of Now is all about understanding the context and the intent. It gives you a location, a movement, you can derive intent. And that's the main thing about Internet of Things. And you can imagine the pressures that it will put on IT organizations when it comes to actually understand that. So from a business strategy perspective, what you see in companies right now is that there is this ethos that, you need to move from the traditional sustainable competitive advantage model, which is a model that we had for the past 50 years. A model that consists of saying, I've got different factors, variables in my business. If I somehow can control all these variables, then great, I will find myself in a competitive advantage situation. But think about one thing here is that, what happened in the past 10 years is that consciously we put the customers on the driving seat. So nowadays, it's the customers that decides the how, the what, the when, and the where. So you are not in control whatsoever what customers want from you. This model does not work anymore. Again, I take the example of the disruptors. Disruptors, they move from that model to a model which consists of continuously innovating, the model of continuous innovation. That's what they do at core. That's why they exist. When you think about Amazon, we were discussing this at the beginning. Amazon started by selling books, right? Online. But if you think about it, Amazon.com, the retailer, primarily picked the book industry because it was an industry where the value chain was so big that it was actually easy to cut down the chain. So it was easy to actually reduce the number of steps in between. Therefore, what they're doing is they're going for an industry that was easily transformable. But it's not because the ethos was selling book. The ethos was to become a digital company that could actually reproduce that model in other areas. Amazon.com, in essence, is a technological company. Technological company that go and disrupts industries that are based on old models, that can be digitized, that can provide, where you can provide better customer experiences. That's how Amazon works. That's why Uber works. That's how all the Airbnbs and all the guys that you hear on the news now actually disrupting industries work. They reduce the value chain. And they create better experiences for your customers. So just, how did Amazon get into, cloud computing? So how come a company that started selling books ended up being the leading force of the public cloud? And the answer is really easy. That's what I mentioned, right? They were looking at industry that were ready to be transformed, industry that were working on old models. So as the company expanded, they created an infrastructure to support that theory. So they created data centers all over the world that would enable them to be agile, to be quick, to be reactive, to be more customer-centric. And in 2006, they realized that actually, they became fairly good at building this type of infrastructure. So they decided actually, why not commercializing this infrastructure? The clever thing that they did is that they actually created a completely separated company, AWS, Amazon Web Services. And what's important to understand is nowadays, it's two different entities. But the key thing is that actually for me, Amazon is one of my customers. Actually, I talk to the guys at Amazon.com, and they are one of my customers. We run on two different infrastructures. They've got their infrastructure, we've got our own infrastructure. And the main mission here is to enable businesses and developers to create sophisticated, modern, scalable, and secure applications using web services. using web services. Web services is basically the techie term that we had a few years ago to talk about the cloud. But Amazon.com is my customer. That's something that I want you to be clear here. And if you're familiar with the IT world, there is a thing called the Magic Quadrant from Gartner. It's kind of like the Bible for the techies. Basically, kind of benchmarks and ranks all the different vendors that are doing, that are selling something within a given category. So this one is a guide for infrastructure as a service, the public cloud. One of the interesting thing here, so effectively where you want to be is on top right corner, right? The vision and the ability to execute. That's where Amazon is. But the most staggering thing here about this quadrant is effectively what they are saying is that if you combine all the other players together and you multiply them by 10, you get the size of Amazon, of AWS, Amazon Web Services. All of the others combined by 10. Combined multiplied by 10. To put things in perspective here, so imagine Amazon when it was a $7 billion company. Right? That was a few years ago. Effectively, every day we are adding enough server capacity to power a company of that size. Every single day. It's staggering. The growth in that market is absolutely staggering. I'm not going to get into the detail of this one, but if you think about the public cloud just back in 2006, 2007, 2008, effectively the cloud was storage, computers, and if you were a bit adventurous, you might have databases. Wow. That's what you had a few years ago. Nowadays, with the pace of innovation that we have, we've got companies like Condé Nast, like many others, that are actually saying, I will close my entire data centers. I will not have data centers. My IT department will run completely on AWS, from the network to the deployment of the tools, to analytics, to compute power, everything, CDN, CloudFront, whatever you want. All these services are now available on AWS. Effectively, you can have a virtual data center running on AWS, and that's where the market is going. And the last slide about AWS, because I want to get back into the innovation topic. One of the key things here when you look at the cloud in general, and the public cloud in particular, is the global footprint, right? I've got customers in the US, in the UK, here now in the Netherlands, that are actually looking at opening operations somewhere else. I want to open operations in Australia. I want to open operations in Asia using Singapore. Effectively, when you operate in the cloud, you are talking to an API. So, give you an example. The shoes Kurt Geiger. They open operations in Asia in 3 hours. Effectively, when you've got an infrastructure that is running in Europe, let's say that you are in Dublin or you are in Frankfurt, changing a parameter that says copy paste or delete Europe, put Asia, minutes later you've got the exact same infrastructure using running in Asia. Many retailers are looking at the global footprint as the main thing to get into the cloud. Kurt Geiger, many others. So, we have an announcement fairly soon about one of the major retailers here in the Netherlands as well. So, getting back into the concept of innovation and what's the recipe around that. So the main thing to say about innovation effectively is hard, right? It's not easy to know in advance what your customer wants, and that's the main problem about innovation. What do I have to innovate? One of the quotes that I like to mention here is the one from Henry Ford when he created the Model T. If I would have had my customers in advance what they wanted, they would have told me faster horses. And that's one of the key things that we hear about our customers is that, they don't really think about, how to transform themselves. It makes it even more difficult, especially in the retail world, when you've got so many touch points. Where do I start? Do I start in the physical world? Do I start in the digital world? Do I try to strike a balance in the middle? That makes it extremely difficult. I would argue that actually in the retail world, the concept on innovation is harder because of all the touch points that you have. So you've got 2 options in this situation, right? I need to innovate, right? It's a survival for me, right? Effectively when you think about it, shops are actually closing in some cases. So, first option is the ostrich type of scenario. I bury my head in the sand and don't do anything. Well, the reality is that, this will have consequences. just from a web perspective, if you actually do nothing, what happens is that if you provide poor experiences on your website, right, the page load is really slow, effectively you will lose a transaction. I would say that, at the end of the day, that's not the end of the world. You lose a transaction. The problem of losing a transaction, and I think of me, and I'm sure you will recognize yourselves here, is if the website sucks, right, he actually screw me once, he's not going to screw me twice. I'm not going back into that website. And that's what this survey is actually showing. And the third thing is that, when I have a good experience on the website, will I be boasting about it? No. But if I've got a bad experience on the website, then I will be actually, slashing that website online. I'm more likely to talk about it. And the most important thing here is the brand damage that you get. That's from a web front perspective. Let's talk about the data, right? Being more prescriptive, understanding better your customers, the customer-centric view. Effectively, when you think about it here, it's more of an IT problem. Why are we not prescriptive? Why are we not smarter about with your data? Is effectively the lack of technology. The licensing problem that we have, the fact that IT departments are really rigid, they're not agile. And this has two consequences, is that effectively, you talk to the same old data and you talk only to some of the data, while the data available to you is growing. If you think about traditional enterprises in the retail space, traditionally, they only use 20% of the data that they have to make their decisions. Within the data warehouse system, only 20% of the data ends up here. And that's what you use to make decisions. That's what is changing. That's what the disruptors are completely changing. They are getting data that they have, and they are trying to get data that they do not have as well. Put things in perspective, in real numbers. So when you think about Amazon.com, right? Globally, worldwide, 100 milliseconds delay cost us 1% of sales. At the global scale of Amazon, 1% of sales equates more or less to my monthly salary. I'm joking. Absolutely not. It's a lot of money, right? So, the consequences are real. And, I talked about the concept of survival. I like to quote Vince Lombardi here, and I see that increasingly, if you are not fired with enthusiasm, believe me, you're going to be fired with enthusiasm. We are seeing that increasingly and increasingly. Not innovating is not anymore an option. And when you think about effectively, what Amazon is doing, how Amazon thinking about, innovation and the digital backbone to unleash this innovation is effectively this ethos of saying, I need to move away from where people behave the way computers work, which is the old world, towards a world where computers work the way people behave. That's what customer-centric means. And having a digital platform that actually enables to do that. So how do they do that? 3 simple steps, and I'm oversimplifying, okay? I'm really oversimplifying, but just to give you an idea of how we are organized and how we work. The first thing that we do is that we experiment frequently in every single business. So that could be AWS, that could be Amazon.com, that could be Kindle, that could be Prime, that could be media, the media agency, all of them. They experiment frequently. I would argue that they don't experiment frequently. They experiment always. It's a live laboratory. The second thing that they do is great to test, right? Obviously, innovation is hard. What do I need to put in front of my customers? Let's test a lot of things. The key thing here is actually to be very practical, pragmatic in terms of how you test things. Measure, 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 measure everything. In fact, at Amazon, all the businesses together, when we release a feature, and let's say that, it's got 10,000 lines of code, half of the line of codes are actually lines that are actually geared towards measuring the impact, measuring the adoption pattern of that feature. So we don't put so much effort in actually the features. We are putting the efforts in listening and understanding how this feature has been adopted. And the third thing, which is kind of the resultant of the 2 first things, is focus on your business. And focusing on your business, I will show you a couple of examples, is effectively, the concept of saying, as a retailer, am I an IT organization? Do I need to run data centers? Do I need to have people actually, just handling database backups? Is it differentiating me from the others? And I will show you how people are actually getting away from that world. And AWS, wrapping up all this, is the digital platform. Digital platform, exactly the same concept at Airbnb, exactly the same concept at Uber, exactly the same concept at all the retailers online that are being successful right now. They are using digital platforms. That's why they exist. Experiment frequently. The problem with experimentation is basically cost of failure. If you don't experiment, it's not because you are stupid. You are all a really clever bunch of people, believe me. The problem is actually cost of failure, how much it costs you to actually test something. It's not because you don't have the ideas. The most staggering thing I get when I actually visit my customers is this single fact that telling me, now that I am using the cloud, effectively, I can launch 10 ideas. I test 10 things, and I've got a sprint of 2 weeks to test it. I know that 9 ideas will actually fail. I'm fine with that, because the idea that will work might be worth millions of dollars. In the old world, you cannot do that. You need to make sure that you just test one idea and you pray that this idea actually works. How you do that, to be honest with you here, is just the core benefits of what the cloud gives you. Elastic capacity. Let's take the example of Black Friday. How many customers I see that are actually telling me that on Black Friday their website was down because of traffic? That should not happen. That should not happen. Elastic capacity is the concept of saying, if today I've got a traffic that requires 10 servers, and for Black Friday I've got a traffic that requires 10,000 servers, it's completely transparent to me. That's what you get on the cloud. Auto-scaling. You actually follow the curve of your consumption, and you just provision what you need. Right? That's what you get on the cloud. At the really beginning, 5 years ago, to be honest with you, retailers adopted the cloud for that simple reason. Because they needed elastic capacity. Because the choice is simple. If I need for Christmas 50,000 servers, I am the investor. I am actually one of the members, or the board members of the company. I've got the choice of saying 50,000 servers for Christmas. I build a data center with 50,000 servers. But what do I do with these 50,000 servers on the 1st of January? Because, you know, I'm just using 300 of them. And effectively what happens is that you strike a balance in the middle and you say, I'm going to get 20,000 servers and pray for Christmas. That's effectively what you're seeing on the market. This is completely changing with the dynamics of the cloud. The second thing is, obviously, you know, if you need to invest on servers, if you have to make heavy upfront investment, it's not going to work, right? You know, we are all short in cash. So, you know, the concept that is no capex, everything is operational, OPEX. The concept that is only pay as you go, you pay by the hour, right? So, you know, I've got customers that are running Monte Carlo simulations or are running different simulations to actually understand their customer patterns in the shop. Effectively, they might run a cluster of 10,000 servers, they run it for 2 hours, and when they're done with it, they are back to 0 servers. They pay for 50,000 servers, or how many servers, just for 2 hours. The key concept to understand here is that if you run 10,000 servers for 1 hour, it costs you exactly the same thing than 1 hour of 10,000 servers. You are paying exactly the same thing. 10,000 servers, 1 hour, or 10,000 hours, 1 server. Obviously, in the cloud, you can do things much quicker if you can throw capacity to it. And you actually end up paying the same. And available on demand, so this is the concept that, you know, when you need capacity, you know, ideally, you don't want to have to wait for the truck to come. And you don't have to wait 6 months to get your capacity or your capacity augmented. It's effectively, I want 50,000 servers, I want them now. It's a click, you've got them. You can use them a minute later. That's how you lower risk. That's how you lower the cost of failure. Measure, improve, iterate. So this one is my favorite one. Measure, improve, iterate. So that's effectively what Amazon.com, in my opinion, does extremely well. And I will put that in the context of few examples, like a quiz. Imagine a graph with 2 axes. An axis which is the scale, and the other axis which is the time. Scale is effectively saying, okay, the adoption rates are here, customer like my application, that's when the thing takes off, right? That's the end of the curve, if you want. And time, if you want, is more the concept of saying, I'm testing things. You know, I've got an idea, I will test this and measure, see if my idea takes off. And if it doesn't take off, I analyze what my customers are doing, and rewrite the feature to actually behave in a different way that is more suited of what I've seen previously. That's what all disruptors are doing when they launch products. Let me give an example here. So a company that started with the name of Bourbon, and their initial idea was a location-based mobile app. And photo sharing is just one of the features. That's effectively, we are here. Bourbon starts, I'm creating something that is just a location-based mobile application. This company now is Instagram. They went through 6 iterations, understanding the customer feedback, understanding how the product has been adopted, rewriting in very short periods of time, very cost-effective, and when it takes off big. Another one here, that started with the name of Odeo, and it was basically a podcast sharing application. That was the initial idea, the first spike. That's Twitter. That's exactly how they started. I can tell you that all the disruptors are starting right now. Every single feature that you put on the website in Amazon.com, that's how we do it. We test, we get the feedback until it takes off. When it takes off big. And if it doesn't take off, it doesn't matter. I use capacity maybe for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. 6 weeks, 10 servers, $100. I lost $100. Big deal. And actually, you learn from your mistakes anyway. That's what we are finding as well. So a prototype shouldn't require you to build data centers, obviously. One of the key concepts here, and maybe I would say the takeaway from me here for you here in this session is that, think of different concepts when you develop ideas. At Amazon, we do something that is called a minimum viable product. And it's effectively the minimum idea that validates my idea. And effectively, let's put that in the context of digital. Let's say I want to create a text editor, right? I want to provide a new text editor to my customers. What will I do? We'll actually write a Microsoft Word that contains 10,000 features, and effectively I only use the bold, italic, and highlight. Basically, I'm using 3 of the features of the suite. Or will I create a notepad? You will create a notepad, that's what MVP means, but the next feature will be driven by what your customers are telling you. You build only what customers want. That's what Amazon does. I'm putting that in the context of how Amazon did it. So the sexy page here that you see on screen is basically one of the first releases of Amazon.com. That's how we started. So this was called Obidos, actually. That was the code name. The problem with Obidos, so Obidos, just for the story, is basically the village that is located at the narrowest point of the Amazon, on the Amazon River. It was actually so narrow that it nearly killed us. This application was a big monolith, a very, very ugly code, with a very, very ugly code, and effectively, as you might know, if you're in the world of coding, it's just trying to plumb things on top and on top and on top and on top, and basically you end up with something that you cannot, is very rigid and cannot be modified. You cannot actually innovate on it. So effectively what we did is basically we took Obidos and we actually started to break it down into different pieces, very, very small pieces. These pieces, in the techie world, they are called microservices. Microservices, the concept of microservices is to say, I'm going to have a team, a very small team. We call that the two pizza team. It's a team that if they eat more than 2 pizzas, they're already too big. Small teams extremely focus on doing one thing and doing it extremely well. Basically, it's a mini startup. Mini startups, and you give them full ownership on how they want to develop that, microservice. So effectively what it means, you give them ownership. They are responsible from the conception back to the actual implementation. And the other thing interesting about it is that, and think about microservices, you give the team complete freedom when it comes to actually choosing their tools. It could be .NET, Java, or whatever. And that's basically what you see on screen here. Every single feature here, so microservices, is a team in the back. Is a team running that stuff. The main advantage is that when you have microservices, you've got the cloud, all these methodologies that are lean, agile, DevOps, it's a marriage in heaven, right? Because you give them ownership. and you give them freedom at the same time. The other advantage is that effectively, if something blows up in one of the microservices, the blast radius is really limited. It doesn't impact the rest. What we are seeing as well operating this way is that the speed of iteration beats the quality of iteration. The more you test, the more likely that you have to catch up bugs in advance. And we've seen that times and times away. And effectively, what we are in a situation right now, these are all numbers that we know. On the website, I believe that the latest numbers is that we can actually update the website every second. Every second there is an update on the website. So one of the key questions, when you get back to your company and actually ask, your IT department, how long does it take you to deploy your code change? The reality is that is the wrong question. The right question is, how long does it take you to innovate? And the final point, because I think I'm running out of time, is focus on your business. Few examples here of customers that are using microservices in conjunction with AWS. Nike Plus. When they talk about their experience of the cloud and the cloud using microservices, effectively they talk about disaster indifference, because in the cloud, by default, you get DR. They talk about load indifference, because effectively the elastic concept. You need more servers, you will have them. Talk about change indifference. When you change something on the website, if you use microservices, effectively, effectively continuous integration and continuous deployment technologies, effectively, it's completely indifferent to you. Another one I wanted to highlight here is my last slide. I'm talking with a lot of retailers, talking about what the store of the future looks like. How can I bring innovation within my store? So there are things such as, the smart fitting rooms, really hot at the moment. And we are trying to see, how can we integrate that with Alexa? Our voice recognition system. So effectively, you're in front of your mirror, and you can put a dress on, and you can actually ask the mirror and say, mirror, change the color of my dress, make the sleeve a bit longer. Mirror, take a picture of myself, post it into Pinterest, and make a plus and a minus to all my friends, so that they vote about what I should be wearing. Mirror, tell me, put this one at this side within my basket, and use these credit card details. But these are the things that we are looking at right now, and this is being implemented as we speak. The concept of having a mobile phone that identifies you and actually generate predictions and recommendations based on historical data or machine learning mechanisms is already done. The beauty about these architectures is actually this part. How many servers as an organization you need to manage? 0. Focus on your business. You are not managing any servers. You are interacting with services, web services. It's a configuration exercise. You do not have to have a guy in the background that is actually plugging cables. You do not have to wait for a truck. You want 10 servers, you have them. You want 10,000 servers, you have them. But still, you are talking to an API. Focus on your business. Happy transformation. I will be staying here for more questions because I think I'm already late. More than happy to, continue this conversation, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.